Hello, my name is Yoganand Michael Carroll, and in this video I will be speaking about an ancient yoga text called the Bhagavad Gita. I will be speaking about this text with the intention of the hope of encouraging yoga teachers and practitioners to go back and study this text and see the power that the material in this text has to inform and inspire a modern yoga practice. The Bhagavad Gita is a tiny little section of a very massive poem called the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is actually the world's longest epic poem, and in its core is a simple little story about a dynasty and a conflict for the throne. So this is a kingdom where there are two groups of cousins who both feel that they should have the throne, and there's a fight. Now, the Mahabharata started out probably very simple telling of this story. It started out probably about 400 BCE. But as the story was told and as it was propagated all around North India and eventually into South India, the story grew. People added pieces, other things were woven in. The story was passed on by bards who traveled around India, and they would come to your birthday party, to your religious festival, to your family reunion, and they would recite a poem, and they would be paid a fee for this. People would listen. Books were scarce back then. Not very many people could read and write, so to have a bard come and tell these stories about your history was a very special thing. When the bards were telling the story in different villages, they would often weave in local historical events and local heroes. When people asked questions about the story, why wasn't Arjuna able to defeat so-and-so when he was able to defeat someone else who was even stronger? The bards would come up with an answer. Well, in a previous lifetime, Arjuna was cursed by his teacher, and that's why he didn't have what it took to win in this particular situation. So the story grew and grew and grew until by about the 3rd century CE, it's massive. 12 volumes long on my bookshelf in the other room. It's a massive, massive story. Now this massive story was in Sanskrit, and it was widely known in the Indian tradition. And in 1785, a British linguist translated the Bhagavad Gita into English. And this one little piece of the Mahabharata, this one little story, went viral through Europe and the Americas. The Bhagavad Gita tells the story of a young man, and it appears from the text that it's his first time on a battlefield. That's not actually the case. If we look at the whole Mahabharata, Arjuna had fought many times before. But if you extract the Bhagavad Gita, it appears that it's his first time on the battlefield. Arjuna believes in this war. It's a righteous war. It needs to happen. It's an appropriate fight. But when he looks around him, he sees many of his relatives, and he realizes that many of these relatives will die. And this is very unsettling for him. The people that I'm fighting this battle for will die. Who would I be without these people? Would I want to live without these people? So Arjuna deeply questions the battle. He questions the role of killing and fighting for something of value, even when that thing that you want so badly you have to pay. So the cost is so great. Is it really worth it? Now, Arjuna's struggle was very, very well received in Europe, in Britain, and in the United States. The British Empire at this time was beginning to crumble. It had spread all around the world. Remember, the sun never sets on the British flag. Many, many young people, mostly men in the British Empire, were conscripted or entered freely the service. Perhaps their parents bought them positions in the military. But military experience was something that a very high percentage of young men in the British Empire experienced. And it's very likely that they could relate to Arjuna's dilemma. They very likely read the Bhagavad Gita and said, that's me, I was there. And the fact that Arjuna questions, what's going on here? Is this the right thing to do? He is guided by his teacher into a very deep inquiry, and in the end of the text realizes, yes, this is the right thing to do. I need to fight this battle. The fact that he resolves his conflicts and comes back into society and back into what society perceives as right action was a virtue. Now, the 1700s, 1800s, right up through the 1900s to modern times, we have a several hundred-year period of personal inquiry. As I said, by the time the Bhagavad Gita was translated into English, the British Empire was starting to disintegrate. Colonies were revolting. The U.S. had our revolt in 1776 and the years after. This was a time when folks were stepping. This began a time when people were stepping away from traditional institutions like the church, like royalty, the nobility, and beginning to question deeply, question themselves, their place in the universe, what was appropriate. So the Bhagavad Gita represents someone going through this inquiry that many of us have gone through, and the Bhagavad Gita represents someone, again, coming back to society and recognizing that these institutions, maybe they can be propped up, maybe they can be fixed or helped in some way, but these institutions are fundamentally good and we should support them. Now, the Mahabharata, as I said, is a massive collection of stories. I like to think of it as a Christmas tree, this little conflict between the two groups of cousins for the throne is like the trunk of the tree. There's a lot of side stories that are like little branches. And then there's a tremendous number of what I like to think of as ornaments. Throughout the time period that the Mahabharata was being composed, and even after, scholars and religious teachers would write articles, what we might call essays or articles, and these articles would then be placed by the bards in particular characters' mouths. And if you could get your article into the Mahabharata, in a way, it made it immortal. So an example of a way that this dynamic works out, in the Mahabharata, there's a little section where a king is sitting in his throne room. It's late in the evening, but he's not quite tired. He's sitting here surrounded by his attendants and advisors, and the king raises a question, and he speaks the question. The old teachings of India teach that there are 4 goals to human life: pleasure, kama, artha, wealth, dharma, a sense of belonging, and moksha. So these 4 aims are called the purusharth, the goals of the soul. If we have these 4 things, pleasure, wealth, a sense of belonging, and freedom, if we achieve them in the right way and hold them in the right balance, they bring happiness. And if any of them are lacking, if any one of the 4 is lacking or distorted, we experience pain and suffering. So this king says to his advisors, of these 4 aims, which is the best? And one advisor raises his hand and launches into about a 20-page discourse on why wealth is the foundation of all the others. If you don't have wealth, you can't have pleasure. If you don't have wealth, you can't support your friends. That generates a sense of belonging. If you don't have wealth, then you have all these little things that you have to do, and you can't really be free. So he presents a very compelling case that wealth is the foundation of the other 3 of the other aims. When this man finishes his discourse, he sits down. Another advisor stands up and says that kama, pleasure, is the foundation of all the other 3. If you're not happy and enjoying your life, you really can't accumulate wealth, and you can't do these things that generate a sense of belonging. You can't really contribute to society. And again, 20-page discourse. When he's finished, he sits down, and the 3rd advisor stands up, gives his discourse, and then finally the 4th. So here is a moment, an evening in the palace when there's nothing really happening. Here's an opportunity for an inquiry into the values that the society holds, and then a presentation showing that those values can be seen from different perspectives. The Bhagavad Gita is a discourse. It's a lecture on the spiritual life. And it's a lecture from approximately the 3rd or 4th century CE. So in the text, we get to see a lot of what life was like, what the values were, what the aspirations were, what spiritual practices look like. The teacher speaks against some spiritual practice from his day and speaks in favor of others. In this discourse, and is presented as a discourse on yoga, the Bhagavad Gita is seen as the first yoga text. Other books older, like Upanishads, will mention yoga. And in those texts, yoga is a catch-all term. It basically refers to that which leads you back to union with the Spirit, whatever that may be in a particular text. The Bhagavad Gita lays out in a lot of detail an elaborate, organized yogic path. Krishna calls it his action yoga, karma yoga. I rarely use that term when speaking of the Gita because a few hundred years after the Bhagavad Gita was developed, the Bhakti movement began in India, and Krishna was elevated to the status of a god, and his words took on a lot more importance, and a different emphasis was added, and yoga came to mean something else. But this is a text that illustrates what yoga looked like in the 3rd and 4th century CE. What I'd like to do for the rest of this video is take one verse from the Bhagavad Gita, look at that one verse, and see what it has to tell us about how the Bhagavad Gita sees yoga and sees spiritual growth. Now, this one verse is a pithy verse. Frequently in the Bhagavad Gita, the author will present a very strong statement. One complete verse will just be a strong statement that might even be a little bit shocking in its explosive power. What does that mean? And then the next 3, 4, 5, 10 verses will explain and elaborate what that one verse means. So the verse that I've chosen for us to look at for the Bhagavad Gita is a pithy verse that gives a general topic that the Bhagavad Gita will be about. Within that topic, it will be explained, and then in other places there will be specifics given. My teacher, Swami Kripalu, believed that as the first text of yoga, this book was intended to be studied deeply, and he sincerely believed that there were lots of hidden meanings in it, pieces that only came out from study and practice, from practice coupled with contemplation. Just intellectually sitting back and looking at the book won't do it. It needs to be taken into practice. So, as an introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, let's look at chapter 1, verse number 1. The first verse from the Bhagavad Gita is complex. It ties the frame to the discourse, the frame story to the teachings. And there are some characters that we need to know about and some context that we will have to look at. But essentially, here's the verse in the Sanskrit. Dharma kshetra kuru kshetra samaveta yoyutsava mamaka pandavaschaiva kim akurvata sanjaya. Now, what does this mean? And who spoke it? Let's look at that first. The speaker here is a man named Dhritarashtra. Now, Dhritarashtra is the king, and he is asking a question. This verse is a question he's asking of someone named Sanjay. Now, we've got to go back and look at this king. His name is Dhritarashtra. And the word Dhritarashtra means to cling tightly. Dhrit, you can feel the harshness in that word. Dhritarashtra. It literally means to cling to the kingdom, to cling to what is mine. Now, this king is on the throne, but we have to look at a little bit of his backstory. When this king, Dhritarashtra, was born, he was born blind. Now, in this time period, as it was through most of the world, through most of human history, if you looked at leaders leaders were supposed to exemplify. The leader, the king, the queen, the leadership should be noble, they should be strong, they should be powerful, they should be wise, they should have lots of qualities that the people respect. If everybody respects the king, they will follow the king. But if you have a king that has a physical flaw or a mental or psychological flaw, that's going to weaken their power. So for Dhritarashtra to be a king and be blind was a compromised situation. People would not feel that, people may not feel seen by this king. If this king has never seen the world, how can he judge? How can he make right decisions? Well, why is this blind king on the throne in this time? Well, the reason is that he has a brother, and his brother is an albino. His brother has no skin pigment, and his brother doesn't look like the other people in his culture. So he too, by the standards of the day, would have been deemed a flawed king, because again, he's different from the people that he is governing. He lacks something that many people in his culture would be seen to have. The albino king was named Pandu. And the word Pandu literally means white. And here, white is associated with purity, not a racist association. In India, there's a lot of cotton and a lot of linen grown, and the cotton is used for most clothing. And when people make cloth out of cotton, it's white. And as it is used, it becomes stained, it becomes other colors, or it may be dyed another color. So Pandu, as white, was a symbol of purity. Pandu represents something. If you look at the name Pandu, pure or white, with Dhritarashtra to cling tenaciously, a little split starts to appear. So when the two princes were born, Pandu was considered the most appropriate king. And Pandu was put on the throne with his brother as sort of the vice president, the backup king. Well, Pandu ruled very well, ruled the kingdom, and Pandu was cursed. And that's a long story. Again, Mahabharata is full of stories. The curse would be that if he ever approached his wives in a romantic manner, he would die. So Pandu cannot have children, which was very, very important if you were a king, because whenever a king dies or is removed from the throne, there is potential conflict, civil war, anarchy. So every king wanted to have a successor in place long before that successor was needed. When Pandu was cursed such that he could not have children, he left the throne and went to the forest to live a spiritual life. If I can't be a good person in the world, I will work on my spiritual life. I will generate as much benefit internally as I can in this life. So Dhritarashtra was given the throne. Now Dhritarashtra was older, but he was passed by when Pandu came along, and the throne was given to Pandu. So from a legal perspective, we might say that Dhritarashtra was the right person for the throne, or at least has a valid claim to the throne. But the throne was given to Pandu, who, once he was cursed, gave it back to Dhritarashtra. Now Pandu went to the forest, and by a magical process, ended up having 5 children. And his children, all sons, were born from the gods. They were half human and half god. Now, Pandu dies in the forest, and his children come back to the city, and they expect the throne. Now, Dhritarashtra has been given the throne, and he has a wife named Gandhari, and they have between them 100 sons, an astronomical number as far as births of children. It's just a very large number of children. The oldest of the sons is named Duryodhana, and Duryodhana literally means dirty fighter, or again, the one who doesn't give up easily. So Dhritarashtra was the older brother, He was given the throne, but it was taken away from him because Pandu, not being blind, was considered a more appropriate king. Pandu was cursed not to have children. He left the kingdom, gave it back to his brother. So his brother's on the throne, Dhritarashtra. Dhritarashtra has 100 sons, the oldest, the firstborn, being Duryodhana. Now, when Pandu was in the forest, as I said, he had 5 sons born from intercession with the gods. He had 2 sons before Duryodhana was born. So the sons of Pandu have a claim to the throne too. Dhritarashtra wants to hand the throne down to his son, even though Pandu has 2 sons who were born before Duryodhana. So what I want to communicate here is who has the right to the throne is not clear. It's a messy situation. It is not clear. There are different arguments that you can make for different characters, but it is not a clear situation. Now, when we look at this verse, an important phrase comes out, the very first line. Dharma kshetra kurukshetra. Dharma kshetra kurukshetra. The word kshetra literally means field. And it's a pretty standard word, pretty solid. Dharma and kuru, as in dharma kshetra, kuru kshetra, are both terms that have a little bit of vagueness to them, and they are terms that are used in yoga. And we need to look at them. The word Kuru. Kuru is a family name. Both Dhritarashtra and Pandu have an ancestor whose name was Kuru. But the word Kuru has another meaning. It literally means action, to act. Kurukshetra literally translates the field of action. And there is a verse in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 13, verse 1, that explains this pretty explicitly. In chapter 13, verse 1, Krishna says, the teacher says, Arjuna, this body is said to be the field. He who knows this is called the knower of the field by those who are wise in such things. So, that tells me that this verse is referring to something inside. Throughout its history, especially in the West, when folks have looked at the Bhagavad Gita, they have seen it as an external battle being fought, an external dilemma, a societal dilemma. It's also been seen in more religious circles as an inner dilemma, as a conflict within myself. So here's a little bit of evidence that what we're really talking about is something that happens inside the body. Now the next word that we need to look at, very important, is dharma. Dharma kshetra. The word dharma, if you look it up in a Sanskrit dictionary, it has a lot of meanings. It means a statute, it means established order, it means custom, practice, law, duty, virtue, justice, religion, and according to right or to rule. So dharma is essentially what's supposed to happen. If we strip the word dharma down to its essential meaning, dharma means structure or system. Religious teachers from India in the last 100 years would write about the 3 big religions in India: Buddha Dharma, Jain Dharma, and Hindu Dharma. So here, dharma meant a group of beliefs. A law is a dharma. The legal books from ancient India are called dharma shastras, texts of dharma. A dharma is a belief system. It's any belief system, it's any structure that we put together to make sense of the world that we're living in. Towards the end of the Bhagavad Gita, towards the end of the 18th chapter, there's a verse where Krishna, speaking as the voice of the soul, says, surrender all dharmas. Give up, renounce all structures, and take refuge in that which cannot be defined, in that which cannot be known with the rational mind. So dharma means structure. Now, here we have dharmakshetra, kurukshetra. So, in the field of dharma, now, to me, that would mean in the field of structure, in the field of a practice, in the field of a set of beliefs. It doesn't tell us which ones. So it might be in the field of Christianity, in the field of 12-step programs, in the field of personal growth. I have created a structure that involves practices, and those practices are happening in the body. Now, my teacher Swami Kripalu would say that dharmakshetra is the practice of yoga. It's the whole yoga body of technique and body of philosophy and the structure of yoga that takes us from one place and leads us closer to a goal given by yoga, enlightenment. And that structure happens in the body. Now, that's a little bit of an imposition. All we know is that the king is asking, on the field of dharma, on the field of action, when my sons and the sons of Pandu came together desiring to fight, what happened? Now, in the verse, he is speaking to someone named Sanjay, and you see that in the very, very last line of the text. The Mahabharata says that the blind king had his sons. Pandu had died, but his sons were here. These two groups of cousins wanted the throne. There were lots of conflicts between them. Horrible things happened. There were atrocities, mostly on the Kaurava side. They're presented as the bad guys for the most part. In all of these conflicts, animosity grew between the brothers, and eventually there was a war with Dhritarashtra's sons and all of their friends, everybody who would fight for them on one side and on the other side. Pandu, Arjuna being the protagonist of the text, he and his four brothers have their army with all of their friends. And these two armies are coming together. Dhritarashtra had a father. His name was Vyasa, a little bit of a magical wizard kind of character. And Vyasa comes to his son and says, "You're an old man now and you're blind. It's not safe for you to be out there on the battlefield. And if you were out there, you still couldn't see what's going on. So I think it's safest if you stay here in the palace while the battle is being fought." And then he says, "If you wish, I will give you divine vision so that you can see what's happening on the battlefield." Now, Dhritarashtra, true to his nature, he loves what he wants. He loves his sons. He's not going to give an inch that he doesn't have to give. It's all his. It's his kingdom. Dhritarashtra's response is, "No, I don't want divine vision. I know that my sons are going to die on the battlefield, and that would break my heart. I do not want to see that. Instead, give divine vision to my attendant, Sanjay. And Sanjay will speak to me. He will report to me what he sees." So here's the king. Here's the situation. We have the palace with the blind king sitting on the throne. On his right side is his attendant Sanjay. And Sanjay has divine vision. Sanjay is looking off into space, and he's seeing the events unfolding on the battlefield. And he's speaking them to the king. So the whole Bhagavad Gita is narrated by Sanjay to the king. And Dhritarashtra essentially asks, on the field of Kuru, on the field of Dharma, on the field of Kuru, the field of action, when my sons and the sons of Pandu came together wanting to fight, what happened? Now, we can take these two groups of cousins and we can say essentially they represent two parts of ourselves. There's a part of me that wants to change, and there's a part of me that doesn't want to change. Dhritarashtra and his son Duryodhana, dirty fighter, the one who clings tenaciously, they have the throne. They represent the ego mind. They're in control. They like their freedom. They don't want things to change. Pandu, the pure, represents a new way of seeing, a new consciousness. You could apply this to yoga practice and say, I come in as I am. And as I do my practice, I find love, I feel expansion of consciousness, and I want to change the way I see the world. I want to change the way I think to incorporate this new consciousness. But the old consciousness sometimes resists. There's a dynamic. I can sit back and look at my life and think of a way that it can be better. I can say, yes, I want that. But if I reach for it through a dharma, through any self-help program, through any structure, set of beliefs that lead me to think, if I do this, I will move in the direction that I want to go. I will become a better person. When we start to get close to our goal, when change really starts to happen, we become afraid. I can sit back and say, wow, for me to give up dairy, for me to give up gluten, for me to give up eat sugar from my diet, these would all be very positive and wonderful things. If I did them, I'm sure I would be happier, I would grow. And I can say, yes, that's what I want. And I can start to move in that direction. But when I sit down with my first meal without dairy or sugar or gluten, something else is likely to kick in. Wait, I don't think I'm going to be happy with this. I like things the way they were before. I don't want to change. I have a friend who believes that if they lost 10 pounds, they would be healthier. And they were with me recently, and they were talking about a diet. And I said, go for it. That sounds like it'd make you happy. That sounds like it would increase your health. Go for it. So my friend says, all right, I'm going to go on this diet. I'm going to lose 10 pounds. And then about a month later, I get a phone call, Yoganand, I've lost 7 pounds. Want to go out for pizza and celebrate? What happened? What happens when we start to change, even if it's a change that we've initiated, some structure that we've embraced, even if it's a change that we believe would be in our best interest? When we get close to changing, even for the better, it's very easy for our resolve to melt away. They say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. There are so many self-help books out there, and they can all be very, very exciting. But I think anyone who's ever used one of those self-help books in a very real way finds that there's a point where it's like, for me to move farther into that realm that I think of as being good, I have to leave something behind. I have to lose something that I'm not okay, that I'm not sure that I will be okay without. And then our resolve melts. This could apply to any personal growth modality, any way of changing our lives for the better. Now, the Bhagavad Gita is going to go on and on and on, and it's going to present, as I said, a lot of information about the yoga of the times, a lot of information about yoga techniques and how they work. There's a lot there about spirit and what we might call the religion of Hinduism. In all of that, overarching is this one little concept. I see positive things, I want to move towards them. When I start to get close, I become afraid. And when I become afraid, I want to turn away, I want to back down. So that's how the Bhagavad Gita starts. And it just gets richer and richer from there. Thank you for listening. And I hope that you heard something that will be helpful. And I hope that what you heard inspires you to pick up that old book and dive in and see if there are other things there that could be supportive of you in your practice. Jai Bhagwan. Namaste.